Hello, Carrie Astrup.
Hi. Are we the only ones in it?
No, this is a webinar set up, and so only certain people show up this way.
Gotcha.
We have 13 attendees.
So far. Gotcha.
Yeah, Carrie, if you could jump over to the other number again now that we are recording, by the way, because it automatically starts recording the way I set this webinar up.
Okay.
So
I was going to remind you.
Hey, thank you, Pat Rabbit. You are my reminder.
Go to the other one and let people know which one to go to.
Yeah, because there were several others jumping in right before I came. So yeah, that'd be great. So we'll give folks just a minute. Good morning, Carissa.
Good morning.
We have people jumping in with us here. I see Deb Thomas is on with us. Had a little bit of confusion this morning about there are two different numbers floating around out there. Some got the message and some didn't. So
can you hear me, David?
I can, Deb. How are you?
Okay, good. I was having trouble maneuvering this as well.
Okay. So we'll give people a couple more minutes since there was a little bit of confusion about which number to use. Carrie Astrup jumped off and got on the other number to make sure she can direct anybody else over here who might be on the wrong number.
So your afternoon Zoom, David, I tried to get on it and it was waiting for the host to start the meeting.
For this afternoon?
Yeah, I went to the wrong one initially.
We're good.
So
I'm here now.
You're good. But
we're here now.
To Davenport instead of Avoca. That's
All right. So I'm going to assume everybody has the agenda, but I know how assumptions work. So I'm going to put in our chat window a link to the agenda just in case somebody doesn't have access to it. There you go. It's in our chat window for the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
It's a shortened URL. I'm looking at the top of the agenda and I see a lot of people on there. That's awesome.
And David, I'm really counting on you to be the tech help.
You betcha. I am tech support for the morning.
Thank you.
So Carrie, how are we looking on the other number? Was there anybody else jumping in there?
Yeah, I can't get in because you're the host. And
Gotcha.
it says this one.
There you go. I'm not much of a host.
You're not being much of a host.
Yeah, no. Let me see here.
Hi, Deb Thomas.
Hi, Carrie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Is that you and your husband that I'm seeing?
Yes.
It's a very nice picture.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Here we go.
There we are. There you go. David, you tell me give me the high sign when you want to start.
All right, I'm going to edit the other meeting so Carrie can, hopefully, if I can edit this meeting. Alternative hosts.
Is that you, Carrie?
It is.
It is.
Carrie, you are now the alternative host on that one. I wonder if you can get into it now.
We'll give it a shot.
All righty, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I tell you what, since we, have a lot to cover, I would like to go ahead and get us rolling here. Carrie will be back with us in just a minute after she hops over and sees if anybody else is on the other number. Again, my apologies for the confusion. We are definitely a go here. So the agenda, again, is in the chat window. If you don't have it, it is there now. welcome everybody. Thank you for choosing to spend time with us this morning. It looks like right now we have about 26 to 30 people joining us right now, 27. Numbers are increasing. We have a great agenda today, lots of things to cover. The first thing we'll be doing is hearing from one of our state mediators, Deb Thomas. I'll introduce her in just a minute. We'll be getting an update from the Department of Education. Amy Alfrey will be doing that for us. Carrie Astrop will be sharing with us more information about the syllabus for our SPED coordinator meetings and how you can get credit for attending these meetings. Ron will be providing with the procedures update. We'll be talking about DHS and LEA point of contacts requirement under ESSA. And then we'll be talking about a special ed advisory committee that we are just now putting together. And I know there were some other requests for topics, and if we will cover those as our time allows. So we'll try to get through our other items a little bit more quickly if we can to get to. I know there was at least one practice issue item that was shared with me last week that I have at the bottom of our agenda. And before we're all done today, I would ask that people complete our survey to give us feedback about today's meeting. We always want to hear back from you. It's important to hear your voice so that we can be sure to cover the items that you want us to cover at these meetings. We could be talking heads, but we may not hit the topics you need to hear. So that's our agenda for today. Now it is my good pleasure to introduce to you a colleague and friend, Deb Thomas. She is a mediator with the state. Deb and I have worked together on a couple of issues this year, a couple of mediations. I've known Deb for some time, though, through work through PBIS and other things over the years. And Deb has a wealth of knowledge that she brings to the table and has some practical experience that she's going to share with us this morning. But Deb and I started talking a couple of months ago about issues that she is seeing out there as a mediator. And we got to talking about, what are the themes that you're seeing, Deb? Because, as we go through mediation here at Green Hills AEA, unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of them. There seem to be some themes that are recurrent. And so we, got to wondering if maybe if we identified those things, then, okay, so if these things are recurring, maybe there are some things we can do in advance to make sure that they don't happen again. So I asked Deb if she could put together a presentation for us to share with us what she's finding in terms of themes and give some thinking about, what are some things that we might be able to do to head things off at the pass, so to speak, so that we don't have to go to mediation, so that we can have good ongoing trusting relationships with families and have well-run IEP meetings, have IEPs that are meaningful and appropriate for the students that we're working with. So with all that said, Deb, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. David, I don't know what the best way to do this is, but the first thing on the agenda, and thanks for inviting me to do this, it really helped me and it'll help other mediators. Oh no, am I gone? Can you still?
All we were seeing was your name, Deb.
Okay, and now what are you seeing?
I've got the screen up with the agenda and stuff so they'll be able to see your handouts.
Okay, very good. This was helpful for me to put together, David, when you and I talked, to share with other mediators. So what I tried to do, and in an hour's time, hope we can do it, is pull out 8 or 9 cases that also represent, those cases represent similar issues. So you can also take that times 2 in regard to what cases I'll talk about. And this is something that helps us as mediators go back and say, how can we prepare people prior to mediation so that we can avoid some of these issues or problems? I did ask David, and I don't know how you want to share this, Dave, if I just kind of want to get the lay of the land of who's participating in this in regard to
Sure.
experience with conflict or actually coordinating or facilitating dispute resolution. And the role, maybe you can even in general say the roles that the people that are participating today play.
And what I would ask people to do would be if they could go to the chat window, and if you could put in the chat window your role And then what was your other question, Deb? What issues that they're seeing out there?
It just experience with disputes. Are
Okay.
they, if they're actually facilitating conflict meetings, or we realize that people are going to be in conflict from time to time. But if maybe on a little higher level, maybe facilitating IEP meetings that are contentious. Do you have any of that going on?
Okay.
And I know that you have 3 or 4 AEA mediators.
Right.
And I don't know how much they have been doing mediations. Just a little curious about that.
Okay. So your role and then your involvement in dispute resolution.
Yep. Thank you.
So we have some people entering information in the chat window. We have a school psychologist, special ed rep with us, principal, director of special education, no experience with mediation. LRE monitor, no mediation within the district.
Okay. I'm seeing that too.
Okay, so you got the chat window as well.
Okay. One thing, I don't want to belabor points for those of you that really know quite a bit about it. On the other hand, I do want to do some general information regardless of the role you play as it relates to conflict. And some of you know me, and I know many of you I've worked with over the years as well, but I'll just give you a little bit of an overview. I've been a mediator for about 8.5 years for the Department of Education. And I still currently am an adjunct at Drake, and my primary course that I teach there is working with families of children with disabilities. Other experience for me is that I was an AEA administrator in Heartland for a while, and I worked at Disability Rights Iowa, was a special education teacher, and then this is my primary work now. I also conduct the statewide training to train mediators. So that's a little bit about me, so you know why I'm even talking about this. If I could start by directing you to the first page, well, there'll be a page that says Special Education Disputes in Iowa. And if you take a look at that, I wanted to give you just the context for what we've been dealing with in 2017. And also, the cases that I'm going to talk about, review with you this morning, none of them are from Green Hills. And I wanted to say that ahead of time because my hunch is you'll look at these and think, oh, that's us, or that could be us. And I didn't use any of those as examples today. I also ran this information by Thomas Mays because we always want to be really sure that there's no identifiable information. We say that in mediation, we're very serious about confidentiality. We also know that in general, this can help you understand the issues better. So we wanted to be able to share it, and he was thumbs up on that. So this year in 2017, we've had 33 mediations were held, and probably 20 additionally were requested but resolved ahead of time. So at the state level, we've received over 50 requests for mediation, 33 held. The complaints, 24 complaints were filed. Some of those complaints, then mediations requested, but that would be reflected in the numbers held, or numbers that we've held of mediations. We had 3 people filed for hearings. Only 1 was held, and there's a decision on that, and you can see that on the website as well. An area that we're getting a lot of requests for and really don't have the capacity to keep up with are the IEP facilitations. And we've been, as part of mediated agreements, sometimes just to get the parties working together again, we agree to conduct IEP facilitation for them if an IEP meeting is suggested as a next step for them. And right down here, we have 6 active mediators. We have 7 that are on contract. 1 hasn't started mediation yet, but will be starting mediations. So we co-mediate now, and that is a real commitment by the Department of Education. We encourage that at the AEA level with AEA mediators as well. Really helps to have 2 people there. So there's an additional commitment, but it's also kind of spreading us thin because we do like to do that. The box below, I'm going to just skip over that right now, other than the left-hand side. The right-hand side, when David and I were talking, I was talking about you're kind of interested in what disabilities are represented. And my hunch is you could guess what some of those are, because those are probably things that bubble up with you all on a day-to-day basis and supporting staff. So these are not necessarily number 1, number 2, number 3, but these are the 4 top areas that seem to come out in mediation. And sometimes there's a combination. So autism, and recently again, and I have on the last page of the table handout, everything old is new again, because dyslexia and unspecified learning disabilities have really popped up in the last 7 or 8 months coming to mediation. And a lot of that is stemming from the hearing that was held where the family prevailed in regard to, and I think you're probably aware of the Andrew case, as well as the AW case is what went to hearing. And it's all about what's appropriate, the whole issue of we can't be having goals and objectives that are just as minimum as can be, very low bar. And a lot of those tend to come up when a student has these unspecified learning disabilities or dyslexia, which there still seems to be so much confusion around and arguments around. A huge area of behavior and mental health. And typically behavior for us, when we get involved, if behavior is part of the issue, mental health is usually part of the issue as well. It's not standard behavioral kinds of issues. So pretty complex. And oftentimes it's with the family mental health issues as well as the child. And then ADHD just latches onto everything all the way through. And sometimes muddies the water and sometimes makes it more difficult to resolve issues. So those are the disability areas that are connected. And then I'm going to talk at the very end about the other issues and areas of dispute that, again, I don't think will be surprises to you, but they've really risen to the top. Now, I'll stop at that point, and I'll stop as we go through these cases and see if there are questions or comments about that. And I'll do that right now, too. Are there any questions about what I just laid out here?
And I would ask that people post their questions in the chat window, and we'll get them there. Can you share about the Andrew case?
I can. I can, but it's probably not the best use of this time. I don't want to say not that I wouldn't do it. If you go to the links, even on the Department of Education website, there's a really good overview of what happened with Andrew, where they are in regard to appeals around Andrew, the impact, and it's already this is as much as I can say, it's already having an impact in our state, and I'll lead it right back to that discussion about dyslexia and unspecified learning disabilities. That would probably be the most I should say about it at this point, but I encourage people to read the decision, and you can also listen to the judges debating how they arrived at the decision for Andrew. And that's going to affect us quite a bit with specially designed instruction and really having more. I think we're going to have more disputes if we don't work at that at the lowest level possible.
Any other questions for Deb?
I love how I ask if there's a question and then tell you I won't answer it. That's really helpful for people.
A bottom line on Andrew is what is sufficient, in progress for a student in special education. In Andrew, it's more than de minimis, to use the language. So there is going to be debate over what all that means. So it's looking at what is acceptable progress, and it's going to be defined over time. More to come.
And appropriate now has really been replaced by de minimis, and how they're tied together, and you can't just do the minimum. But I think we'll be discussing a lot about what is the minimum, and now we're saying the impact is going to be you need to go further. So thanks for that, David. If you go to the table, that handout that was prepared for you, they have 9 cases there. So I tried to lay them out the way that we receive them when they come in for mediation. And most of us don't really read through meticulously when a request is made, because we really do try to to be neutral and have an open mind. We want to know what the general issues are. But these are 9 of the cases that I've had this year that I think have an impact on you. They'll have an impact on school people. So the first one, and I've tried on some of these also to give you the rest of the story so you can see how it got to this. And this is a middle school student that was placed in a contained BD program without the agreement of the parent or any prior written notice. And I know you're thinking, well, that can't happen. And this is happening pretty routinely. So the parent wanted the student removed from the program and requested a mediation. So the LEAs, I'm going to talk a lot about positions. So many times when we get into mediation, it starts with a position, and we really have to back it down to see what are the interests that are driving the position. And oftentimes, if we can meet some of the interests, the position dissipates for everybody, if we can help with that. So the parents' the LEA was, we have it, and that program can serve. So they'd already identified a program that can serve them. The parents, I don't want my child in that program. And for some of the many reasons that I bet you're very familiar with. They didn't want the role modeling. It was done without their permission. They didn't see the behavior as concerning as the school district did. So the outcome, the school just refused, or the district refused to remove the student. Parent pulled the child and homeschooled the child. Getting all done with that, here are the lessons learned. There should be no predetermination. And again, this is not a surprise to anybody, but this is happening, and it's happening routinely. The other issue here was a communication issue where the parent was difficult to reach, but they wouldn't return the parent's calls, and that was validated that they had not been doing that. So there wasn't meaningful involvement even in the IEP process. And additionally, and this will lead us down to the rest of the story, additionally, they were cutting and pasting goals for all the kids in the middle school BD program had the same behavioral goals. So this started to raise an issue. If you look at the rest of the story, there were 4 mediations in this district, almost exactly the same. And the 5th mediation was a kindergarten student in this district that they were going to just place in a BD program in 1st grade as they transitioned. Again, no prior written notice. We have a program. We're going to put them there. The other thing that stood out about this is the other 3 families were not familiar with each other. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't even know each other. So it wasn't as if a group of parents got together and said, you know, I'm going to have a complaint. I'm going to go to a mediation. So this is, you can see, a systems kind of issue. The position that the AEA was in, and this is going to be a theme that runs through, the AEA knows things aren't right. And the AEA knows the right way to do them. Almost, I mean, it's 9 times out of 10, the AEA knows what they're doing. They're having trouble working with the local district who thinks that they don't have to do what the IEP says, and that the AEA is not their boss. So there's always that fine balance, and I know that you experience this, and I'm not sure how to resolve it other than the continued work on relationships and what you can actually do for districts to help them. But our AEAs are usually pretty much, they're shining pretty bright usually in regard to how this works out. So that's that one, and those issues aren't really resolved yet, and it's a system-wide issue there. The second one, the parents requested comp ed because of a lack of progress, and this is where it's starting to get, this is where NDRU can have some impact, the decision made regarding NDRU. Because of the lack of progress of IEP goals, minutes spent on specially designed instruction, and they requested a specific methodology, which I'm sure you all are familiar with as well, or have had experience where this is happening. So the proposed resolution was to provide a certain number of hours in comp ed for instructional time lost. They also hired a private tutor, and they were paying out of their own pocket for the private tutor, and they wanted to be reimbursed for that, and they wanted the specific methodology. So the LEA's position was no comp ed. They maintained they could provide a comparable and that they could provide comparable methodology, not the program the parents were asking for. And the parents maintained that the students needed that specific methodology and didn't trust the district to implement the other methodology. So, and the parents wanted reimbursement. So the outcome was no agreement reached, and they are going to hearing on this one. So here's what happened again. There was not meaningful involvement in the IEP process, and they were not diligent about monitoring progress, meeting when progress wasn't made in a timely manner, and reevaluating what needed to be done. So it had gotten way out of control because they hadn't met on a regular basis or followed the IEP. And they really weren't looking at data for decision making for this student. Questions about anything here so far, or any surprises to you?
And please throw your questions in the chat window there, or Carrie, Pat, you guys can chime in with your mic too.
Okay, we'll keep going. So number 3, and I can see it here if you can't, if it's not up here. Oh, thank you. The parents wanted a change of placement from the resident district's post-secondary vocational program. And it was a non-district program that they wanted their student moved to. So the proposed resolution was, we want to change a placement. The LEA, the district, said, no, we have a program that your student's in, and that's the program where they belong. And the parents said, no, that program isn't working for our student. We'd like a change of placement. And particularly, there's no LRE, and the peers, there were like, it was a boy and 2 girls in the program. So the outcome was, there was an agreement to look at both, do a kind of a side-by-side comparison of both of the programs, to do a reeval to determine the student's current needs. And here's a position, this could have really been what was driving some of the position. The student wanted and needed a job. Every job they'd tried had fallen through, and they'd been waiting now 6 weeks for a job. The student had nothing. There was nothing in the works for a job. And once they agreed to immediately find a job, things got better. It was like, well, maybe this program can work, and maybe if the student has a job. So their solution for the parent was, let's get them out of there. But what they really cared about was that the student didn't have a job, and that no efforts were being made. Additionally, here's what was happening. They were cutting and pasting the goals again. All 3 students had the same goals. They weren't monitoring the goals. Every time they monitored them, they were exactly the same. So no progress was being made. The student wasn't regressing, but wasn't progressing, and this was over months. The family was not meaningfully involved at all. They questioned the IEP goals and the transition process, and they didn't get feedback on it. And the district did predetermine that, okay, we have a program, so that's where the student goes. So that was, again, some of the issues that around predetermination. Seems like that wouldn't be happening, but it is happening. And is there a question there? I saw a question about reason.
Yeah, I popped one in. This is Patrick Rabbit. I just popped one in the window there, and it might not be the right place for it, but it's you're talking about change of placements, and we have a consideration right now for a school that is having a difficult time finding a driver, and so that's why I popped it in there. Just what's a reasonable amount of time to find a driver? Because some of the things you're talking about are exactly the same here about the lack of trust in the district and things like that. So,
I'm glad you raised that. Well, lack of trust runs all over lessons learned, and we'll talk. That's a hard thing to reestablish, but we can't reestablish it until we talk to people about the fact that it's gone and what's it going to take to get it back. And an issue of reasonableness. This is going to come up. I don't know, maybe I didn't. Oh, yes. We've had a couple of these sorts of things where part of the agreement is that we'll be looking for a new associate, or you'll be looking for, maybe it's a transportation, or we're going to be looking for special education nurse consultant involvement. And this is where the trust issue is important, and it's really tenuous. So we agree, we the educators agree that we're going to do that. We don't typically write it into an agreement, but we say we will do that. But you need to have an understanding that we don't have control of all the variables. If you don't have a good relationship with the folks you're working with, it really doesn't matter what you say in regard to making them believe you're actually going to do it. And to me, the important thing is, as this is rolling out, as you're looking for transportation, a new teacher, a new associate, that you are in constant and maybe over communication with the families involved. Like we tried again this week, here are the efforts that we've made. That's just one of the few things you can do to assure people that you're following through with what you said. If it's not out there, you can't get it. But if you're showing reasonable efforts and you're communicating it, you're protecting yourself as well as trying to reestablish trust with the family.
And Pat, I think you and I need to talk about this one too. I was getting ready for this meeting, so was unable to respond to email. So let's follow up more.
Sure. I thought that it might be this issue of reasonableness might be, like she was talking about.
Absolutely.
Might be good for us to hear.
Absolutely.
And absolutely, David, I'll call you.
Okay. And then there's another question in the window there. How should parent involvement be documented? And where in the IEP?
I don't know that it's an issue of IEP documentation as much as I know you need to do this because of what can happen down the road. I understand that. For me, the quality issue is documenting phone calls that you make. If you're sharing written information, keeping a record of the written information that you're sharing, and have that as part of record. Just have that as part of record.
Right. And in a recent case, it was not in the IEP. It was in somebody's journal, a daily journal about communication home, whatever that looked like. So something like that, when you go to mediation, can be introduced as part of the documentation that gets reviewed.
And record.
Yep.
Putting it in the IEP, it could say, part of it can be that you have a communication plan, and that is written in the IEP, that there's a written communication plan, and then what it's entailing, and then have your record separate from that, or you can attach the information if need be, that you've made those kind of contacts as well. The biggest issue is that people know you're doing what you said you were going to do. So next one, number 4. This one, the parents, this happened twice, although the parents didn't remove on the second one. But the parents removed this student, young student, 7-year-old, from school after a seclusion incident. And it was that the student was being repeatedly put into seclusion, and there's absolutely no agreement, no behavior intervention plan that included seclusion as part of behavior control. And the student really didn't have large behavioral issue. They were focus issues, transition kind of issues. So they just pulled him. The LEA said that, let's have an IEP meeting. We want to get him back. They even started talking about filing truancy report against the family, which is not helpful. And the parents were very willing to meet. So starting to talk like that was not helping the trust issue as well either. And so the parents agreed to meet, and they just wanted assurance ahead of time. Okay, you're not going to use seclusion. They were leading with that the whole way. So the LEA said, we just want the child back in school. Please come, let's have a meeting. Parents said, we don't even want to meet if we're not going to talk about no seclusion ever. So they said, we'll come and talk. So they had a mediation. An agreement was reached. And so they started all over with an individual education evaluation, because the student was twice exceptional. And I can share this about the student. The 7-year-old was very versed in string theory. So we're talking about someone that is truly gifted. At the same time, had autism, and was also not being challenged in classes, as you can imagine, as a young person. the really good thing that came out of this was the team really came together to look at a different way to use evaluation so that it wasn't the minimum. Oh, well, he's already above average, so we don't need to go any further on what we're going to do with that. And they designed a really good evaluation for him so that they could really meet his needs. They also did agree, no seclusion. There was a lot of talk around what they could do if he became agitated. The reason they didn't send him back was they started to see at home before this happened, they started to see behaviors that had not been occurring. They requested a facilitated IEP, and one was conducted. And so the lessons learned here were follow the IEP. They hadn't in regard to the behavioral issues. They didn't contact the family when they thought they might have behavioral issues. Revisiting the provisions of the IEP, things weren't working and they weren't getting back together to discuss them. And they made unilateral decisions about behavior. So the parents were also very responsive, kind of parents. And after the IEP, facilitated IEP, wrote a letter to the Department of Education saying, if we could just have this, we had 5 IEP meetings in his life. And if we could have just had the first one where everybody spent this amount of time and all the players were there, we think we could have avoided this kind of a conflict down the road and all the time it took to make this up. And now this has gone on a couple months and it's working for the family. So a lot of lessons learned there from, again, when there's a problem, please address it when you know it's a problem. And these people said an apology would go a long way. People apologized. It really did help them start taking the next steps to move ahead. So 5, should we go to 5? So this one, and if anytime you do have a question, just send it to that chat and we'll stop again and revisit that. This one was a failure to evaluate for emotional disturbance and behavior disorders. So the LEA disregarded the IEP team decision, just disregarded it. So the parent wanted to follow the IEP until a comprehensive evaluation could be conducted, and they wanted their student to stay put. Because what the district had told the student, you're not going to go here if you don't start behaving. And they weren't using the IEP, they were just following the standard discipline practices in the school. So the LEA didn't contest the proposed resolutions, like they went back and looked at the IEP, but they wanted the student to continue in special education and have a new evaluation. The parent did. So that's what happened. The student would remain in the program, be reevaluated. It was conducted. Again, the lessons learned here, this district was unilaterally deciding that they didn't like the behavior, and yet they weren't conducting an evaluation, and if they didn't follow it, they couldn't stay in school. So it was, once again, the AEA was working with the district to get them to implement the IEP and work with the family. And the AEA and LEA were in disagreement. So once again, there's that real tension and balance between the support the AEAs can offer and when they know something is in compliance or not in compliance, and how they work with the LEA players. So the family kind of gets stuck in the middle on that. And I would say the AEA gets stuck in the middle on that as well. I don't know the answers to that other than relationship. And that seems so subjective, but you know if you have one or not. And you know if people believe you or not. So I would be interested on anybody weighing in about what are you doing when you bump up against, things aren't right, and they're out of compliance, and the LEA proceeds anyway. How do you deal with that?
Deb, we do have a general supervision flow, if you will, of decision making for that. But much as you've directed here, it's about the relationships that we have with schools so that we can help work together and influence the things that need to happen legally and in best interest of kids.
Mm-hmm. Is it a reoccurring issue? I see it as a reoccurring issue. I don't know that you all do.
You want to answer that?
This is, yes, I would say it's a reoccurring issue.
Your role.
Oh, I'm Carissa Otto. I'm a special education consultant, and it is a reoccurring issue.
Okay.
And sometimes I have a better relationship with the families in some instances.
Yes, totally get that. Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm sorry that it gets to our level, but it's pretty glaring when it does. It's pretty glaring and obvious when it does. Let's go to 6. So this one also was a failure to conduct a full and individual evaluation. This was a small request over a long period of time. So the proposed resolution was, will you just do it? We're going to mediation. We're asking you to do it, tailored again to the student's unique learning needs. So the LEA was willing to conduct the evaluation, and the parent was saying prior to that, they have not taken into account the unique learning needs of the student. Once again, twice exceptional. And that seems to really pose problems in regard to how to evaluate the student to really, and you know what comes up a lot in this is executive functioning. So we're talking oftentimes a lot about executive functioning, and people either believing that that's a controlled behavior and that the students really can do that, or it's something that we don't understand well enough that we aren't accommodating it, or we don't have specially designed instruction to address it. So the agreement, they did conduct it. And the one lesson learned here, and to me, I know this is probably incendiary in a little bit, in a way, but we're bumping up against RTI and individual comprehensive evaluations when students are very bright. And I know it's not just when students are bright, but I've seen at least 3 of these this year, and these are with my 20 that have come up, and that seems like a lot. And we're trying to, the AEA is very good at bringing in specialists and their experts on, let's do this a different way. Let's really base it on the student versus basing it on the way we do evaluation protocol typically. And when they have done that, they've been really successful, and the students are more successful that way too. Once again, this just went too far, too far, too far. You can see they'd been paying for private tutoring for 2 years. They'd requested it for 2 years. Progress was not being made, and this was well known by everybody, and it just kept going and going. So then there's that tipping point where families are like, we're done with this. We're going to make a step forward. And I don't know what the relationship ahead of time was like with I think the family was, they weren't a family that came and were furious and we couldn't work through the issues. They were just, we don't understand why this isn't done. And when all parties were there, it was probably one of the shorter mediations. This has also been after Andrew, and we're looking at 2 years here of no progress, and none, not just a little progress, but none. So I'm wondering if there's an impact of that already, what we're going to see moving ahead.
So the outcome for this one was just the full evaluation. There was no comp ed or paying for tutoring.
And family was fine with that. Just do the evaluation. The LEA was looking then to, if we need to provide additional tutoring, we'll talk about that. They were going to offer that back. It didn't go in the agreement, but they were going to offer that back.
And Deb, the ones I've been in this year involve attorneys. And when you get attorneys involved, it's oftentimes they go for everything. And so, I mean, they've been costly. They cost the AA and the school district not only emotional trust and those kinds of things, but financially as well. Like in this case, was there an attorney involved with this one?
Yes.
Okay.
This and the attorney involved in this one, typically this attorney says, and right up front, I will do it for this amount. This is an easy fix. I'm asking that it be done. Done. It was a shorter mediation, maybe 3 hours, 2.5 hours, versus 7, 6, 8.
Sure.
It was very straightforward, but it's really coming off of RAW and Andrew, where it's it's just going to have that impact. I think people are going, let's pay attention to this.
Okay.
Do the best that we can. Yeah, this was a short one and an easier one to do. And it looks easy. Now, when they get the evaluation results back, we'll see what happens. And we'll see how it plays out. But getting through this issue was not difficult.
Okay. Thank you. Number 7.
Number 7. Middle school student denial of, well, most of them are, the issue's denial of FAPE, but specifically regarding repeated suspensions and lack of a current and effective BIP. And there were 2 of these in a row in the same district. So the LEA thought the student should not have additional supports that were agreed upon. One of the supports, the child had anxiety, student had anxiety, and in the behavior intervention plan, it was, you may use your cell phone to call your parent when you're feeling anxiety. They just said, nope, I'm not going to let you do that anymore. And the parent said the student should be allowed all the supports in the IEP, and the administrator needed to talk to the student more respectfully. And some of the backstory on this is this student had really unique learning needs and was going through some interpersonal changes that people would have value judgments around. So part of it, you could see that playing itself out, which should have nothing to do with the IEP, but it was playing itself out that way. And the student needed a one-on-one associate also because of the anxiety. So the position was that the student just has to comply to these behavioral rules like everyone else, or they can't go to school here. And that was stated by the superintendent. And the parent was like, you can't just get rid of my student. And we need to be in this district. There is an IEP. What's in it has been effective when it's been used. So the outcome, there was an agreement. There was a new FBA that would be conducted, new BIP that would come out of it, a communication plan, and then providing training and support for people around that student. So this was highly vulnerable because of the type of student this was. Without me telling you what it is, you can imagine things that would raise strong emotions in people. And without saying more, because it'd be really identifiable in regard to what was going on with this student, but the district had just decided we're not going to do it and we're done with them. So they did agree, and the student was not receiving specially designed instruction during suspensions. They actually asked the parent if they wanted comp ed for that. Parent said no, because I don't think my student will take advantage of it now. So the district did come forward and say, we know that we need to do that. An apology was given, which went a long way, especially with the student. And then the LEA needed the supports related to how to develop a behavior plan. And the AEA was able to do that, but they weren't taking the AEA's help. And they also needed training on IEP implementation, that you just don't unilaterally, because you're the superintendent, say that you can change a child's IEP. Now, do you ever have that happen? Curious about that.
I have had that happen.
Who is saying that?
That was Pat.
Sorry, I'm
okay.
Pat
I thought I saw you. I can see you.
Yep.
Were more than once.
Just once for me in my 4 years here.
And how do you respond to that when you see that happening?
So when that happened, I just made the statement that regardless of your position, this is an IEP team decision, and the IEP, and even though the decision was made prior to your arrival here in the district, it is written into the IEP, and we must abide by the IEP.
Oh, that's nice and straightforward. I mean, it's just nice, factual. Did it turn around?
The parents agreed to his statement. It was in regards to transportation, and there was a feeling that the bus should not be, I don't want to get too deep into this, but the bus should not be, the transportation shouldn't be following what was written in the IEP. because that would make all the bus stops late. And the parents finally agreed to it. It was a good conversation. But ultimately, it was his position that this is the way it's going to be, and this is the way it must be. And then the transportation director got involved as well, and the parents just finally agreed to it.
Oh, okay.
I did remind the parents that they didn't have to agree to it, and there were other alternatives for them if they disagreed with the conversation, and that they had due process rights, and reminded them about the safeguards. But they did go with what the superintendent wanted.
There's one coming up, I think it's my last one, where the family threw in the towel that way as well. I think it's the last one. So this number 8, again, look at this, failure to evaluate a known behavior disorder, a discrimination against, this is written into the nature of the dispute, discrimination against the student for the disability, and then the threat of educational services because of it. So they were asking for a behavioral evaluation and develop a plan. And it was behavioral and emotional and mental health kind of issues. And the student was to continue to receive services. That's what the family asked for. And again, the LEA just said, no, this is unacceptable. They have to follow the disciplinary practices and procedures or they can't go to school here. This happened to be the same district as the one before. The student and the parents said the student needs to be in school, needs the interventions, they're required, they are agreed upon. So the agreement, again, came up with they would evaluate, a new BIP would be developed, the student would continue receiving services, it wasn't going to stop, and then the LEA would investigate additional services to provide some comp ed because the student was out of school so much. So comp ed was an issue here. And if you see in that last column, to me, it's more what lessons were learned. It's more a question than a lesson. Because once again, the AEA knew to do the right thing, knew what the right thing was stuck in the middle. The LEA didn't have a sound understanding of their authority related to it. And in one case, it was very similar to this, another district. The LEA had their own attorney, the AEA had their own attorney, and the parent had their own attorney. The LEA and the AEA didn't agree. They caucused together in regard to trying to figure things out. Fortunately, the AEA was able to explain to them that they're required to do this. But to even have families see that the LEA and the AEA were at odds with each other and had to have their own representation, it just didn't go real far for relationships. It just didn't look good. And as it turns out, they did get, the student has remained in school. And I don't know, sometimes when we used to call back and check on how's the agreement working, but when we did that, people would often go, you know what, hasn't been working that well. So our answer to it was don't call them back, which is not probably the right answer. But we used to have that follow-up evaluation system in regard to how the legally binding agreements were working out. So not a great outcome, but a better understanding by the AEA, LEA about how they had to work together. And that LEA, the AEA is your friend and they know what they're doing. And that did play itself out. That played itself out in this situation. Any comments about that?
Remember, you can put your questions and comments in the chat window. Want everybody to be a part of the conversation. I can't imagine getting our own attorney and not sharing with the school district. Never done that. That would be so odd.
Yeah, it's happened. I've had 3 of them that like that.
Wow.
Yeah. And it makes it really hard on, it makes it hard on everybody. Why does the chat window say 26? Because we've already had 26 comments?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Last one, number 9. This is the one, ultimately, the parent just gave up. The nature of the dispute was the change of school because the parents moved outside the school boundary. The child did have an IEP. It was a kindergarten student that would be transitioning to first grade. And the parents said, can the child just stay in the current school and move to the next grade because they had so much trouble with social anxiety, etc. The LEA said, nope, it's district policy, not in the boundary. Now, thinking about IEP goals and how to meet needs of a student, not considered at this point. So, nope, not going to do it. The parent had trouble, again, like the child has all of these issues. They're in the IEP, they're being addressed. Held an IEP meeting, sadly asked the teacher to kind of push the issue, which put the teacher in a really bad position. District came back and said, nope. A physician letter, nope. Just totally denied it. And probably they tried 5 or 6 different ways to have this happen, and it didn't happen. So eventually they just quit. This ended the dispute. And I am curious about how this is handled in other districts. The student did have an IEP, and the IEP was being fulfilled in that school. Moving the student to the other school, they still wouldn't have the same teacher. And the recommendation was it would be better for the student to stay in that school and have the IEP implemented there. Have you had this happen? Has anybody had this happen? Where it's a boundary issue, student with disabilities.
Deb, just to be clear, it's within the same district? Both schools are in the same district?
Yeah, like blocks away from each other. Parent just moved to a new home. No experience with it?
We don't have many of those schools in rural Iowa.
Yeah, that's true. You wouldn't.
Over on the west.
You wouldn't. And this was a very short distance. It seemed like it could have been resolved in a better way.
Right. I think, and it's the administrators need to be involved in that conversation and, working that out. I mean, we've had parents move out of district and have had conversations between soups, about can we place this child back in your district because they were doing well there. It just depends on how those conversations go.
Yeah. And this was same district.
Yeah.
Same district, just a blocks apart, apparently.
Yeah.
So those are 9 of the cases that we've dealt with, or that I've dealt with. And that means also with a couple of co-mediators on top of it. What I am interested in, and if we could do this in the chat box, are just your questions and concerns about the types of disputes you're encountering.
Deb, while people are putting things there, a thread that was woven throughout, now you mentioned it explicitly, and that was meaningfully involving parents. What does that look like, feel like, so that we as educators know that we are doing what we can to meaningfully involve the parents?
One of the first things rises to the top. If a parent contacts you, contact them back. And this does not happen. I'm even going back to is it Patrick? Patrick?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
I'm even going back to yours, what's reasonable as educators or just as people. When someone contacts you, what's a reasonable amount of time before you respond? And putting yourself in people's shoes, if you have a question or a concern, what's the expectation for first getting a response and then how long you have to wait for it? And that's one of the number 1 complaints. The second part about meaningful involvement is parents continue to not understand the processes that we think they do because we've talked to them so much about it, and that maybe they've been involved in IEP meetings for many years. That really doesn't mean they still understand what the next steps are, particularly when their children are transitioning from different levels of programs, and then really at the post-secondary level, transition level, what's going to happen now. And the other part of meaningfully involving parents is to really try to have a personal relationship with people on a personal level. I don't mean intimate, knowing everything about you, but having a relationship with these families goes a long way to resolving differences. And part of the IEP process, if I go back to the one where we did the facilitated IEP and the parent said to us, had this been done day one, we wouldn't have the concerns that we have now. We know we wouldn't because we've met all of you now. Everybody had a say in how they were going to support the student. You let us have a say. The argument always is that just takes so much time because that was a 3-hour IEP meeting, maybe 3.5. But that was after a 7-hour mediation and 5 IEP meetings before that when the child was just in first grade. So how much time did you really lose or save or spend? And it's, again, where parents, there's nothing wrong with having a draft IEP if it's really a draft. But when parents feel that their words have not been articulate, or their words haven't shown up anywhere in the information that they're sharing, or there's no acknowledgement that you heard what they said, that's not meaningful involvement. And again, to start this, I wanted to say there's just no right answer on all of these because so much of it is kind of amorphous, and it's some of it's pretty clear cut, like predetermination. Those things are pretty clear cut. But if you don't have the relationship with families, and if you don't take the time with them, and time is what we all think we don't have enough of, that's where it bubbles up. That's where people feel they're not being meaningfully involved.
So what I hear you saying, Deb, it's not complex. It takes time. It's doing the simple things. Responding to phone calls, making connections with people, understanding where people are coming from, truly listening to them.
Really, and don't use emails to communicate. It's just, yes. It's crazy. And some people are even saying, don't use text. Now you'll have families say, oh, just text me. There are really small things that you should use text communication for. And those would just be books in the bag or something, or just a reminder about tomorrow morning. But nothing really substantive should be in texts. Yeah. And, the way that things can be misunderstood on top of that.
No, I don't want to belabor the point, but noting that the thread is meaningful participation, Deb. So for example, what you've done frequently in your presentation is to ask questions. And I see that happen a lot at IEP meetings where someone from the team will say to the parents, what kinds of questions do you have? What seems unclear? Which is always a really good practice. Another good practice is to say, hey, look, this is where you're exhibiting your rights. We were talking about consent for an evaluation or consent for special education services. You're exhibiting your rights, and here it says that you have that right to do it, and now you're doing it. So,
I love that. I love what you just said there, even pointing out to people, oh, that's what that is. That's what that looks like. And the other thing, the meaningful involvement part, is thanking parents. And I know this should go 2 ways. I really get that. And I'm having concerns about mediations where you know what the processes are. There are 5 steps. One of them's perspective sharing. We always let families share the perspective. The educators don't get to share theirs. We have not found a way where it doesn't just become well, you said this and you said that, and it becomes an argument, but it's really imbalanced. And in a way, it empowers parents, but at the same time, it seems to make our educators very angry and feel very attacked. So we have to come up with a better way. It's not just all about the families. I do lean that way, but it's not all about that. When you give them specific examples like that, that's really impressive to look at those sorts of things. You're not going to make it every time, but we can do better with families.
Deb, go ahead. We have some comments in the window there. If you want to look at those for a second.
I don't see them.
Okay, it's in our chat window. One is from Pat. You've covered several scenarios that are applicable to us. 2 things stand out. Administrator support when things are out of compliance. That's hugely important, obviously. And then protected SDI time for students. And Deb, you and I have talked about that one several times. So any comments about either one of those? Administrator support and protected SDI time.
the interesting thing about administrative support, and this is coming out, and I've just started putting together presentations on the power of apologies, and this rose to the top for me. One thing about apologizing in special education, and I think it generalizes to the role of the administrator, period, is when something really serious has happened, you send someone in a position of authority to explain it, to make it right, and to apologize about it. And to me, that's the administrator. And it's real clear in all the reading and research that you send those people to take charge of it and take responsibility. Now, if those people don't do it well, you kind of have a problem. But you need to take it to a higher level. And ask me the question about administration again and SDI.
Administrator support when things are compliance. Then the SDI one is about protecting SDI time. There are interruptions that could come up, like district testing. The special ed teacher gets pulled to do something else, so the kids are left with a para when it should be instructional time. Just different things.
I think this is hard. I don't think there's an easy fix for this. I think that maybe some professional development around paying attention to, okay, those things, and that we have to be even more diligent now. Okay, you had an assembly for 45 minutes. I think somebody said something about interruptions because no homecoming parades, district testing, etc. Noting that is happening, and then saying, now, how do we make up for that? I mean, having a specific plan to address, we know that's going to happen. We can't just say, oh, well, then we don't have to do specially designed instruction because these are legitimate activities. It's like, well, you still have to do them. So having a plan for what happens ahead of time when you know that's coming up. I mean, you can get a pass occasionally on you didn't know, but you still should be aware that the student lost that time and that there's a plan for how they're going to make it up. We just have to pay attention to it all the time. It has to be there all the time.
And then we had a question posted just now. When we apologize, are we putting ourselves in a position that we are admitting wrong? I've got the chat button up. I love that question. All of the information, think about this, all of the information being shared or that I'm putting together on apology is the number one reason that we don't apologize in special education is because admitting wrongdoing means that there's going to be a consequence, as in due process. That is not the case. Admitting that you're wrong, saying you're sorry, having restitution or making restitution for it and moving forward, that's not going to bite you back. And, admitting that you're wrong doesn't say that you're going to have a lawsuit. It's counterintuitive. I know that's what we've always been. It's kind of like the unwritten rule of don't recommend residential treatment because then we're going to end up paying for it. That's a little different than admit wrongdoing. We made mistakes. We're sorry for the mistakes we made. We're going to make them right, and we're not going to do it again. There is nothing wrong with doing that. And I think having the fear, it may be one of the fears I know for the higher level administration is like, oh, we say that we're going to be vulnerable. No, you're already vulnerable. And to continue to try to cover for being vulnerable isn't going to make what you did go away. And if it plays itself out in a hearing and you didn't acknowledge it, it's way worse than if you acknowledge it early on and try to make it right. And chances are half the time it'll go away because of what you said or what you did. Ego enters in here quite a bit for admitting wrongdoing. And, I think even, well, David, you and I have been in some meetings where people it's their identity. And Yes.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to admit that they made a mistake. And it's also a lot of times administrators are trying to protect their staff. I get that, protect and support, but then you make the apology for what went wrong.
Yep. Definitely.
So
And
don't worry is what I'm saying.
It's amazing to watch how things change once the apology has been given.
Yeah. And sooner than later. And a bad apology is worse than no apology at all. And that's, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. That is not an apology. Don't use that. I'm sorry you feel that way. If that's what you think you're doing, like you're apologizing, that's not an apology. So there's so much behind that. And the 4 steps, the four parts of an apology. And I'm just saying, don't worry about admitting wrongdoing. So I had that. Any other questions? Thank you for the questions. Oh, Sarah says, I would echo the struggle of ensuring fate for students in extreme behaviors while alternate school settings are full with indefinite waiting lists. Yeah. That, again, there are some things we just have to work with. And if we're working with it, we need to work with the relationships of people involved in it and around that. One last thing, I think it all came out, but on the first page again, there are those 6 bullets about the other issues and disputes. And of course, SDI comes up over and over again, not following the IEP. Decisions made regarding discipline and instruction without consent. Not making progress. Very first page. Special education disputes in Iowa, right there. Other issues and disputes. And those are the big topics that are continuing to come up for us. We I bet more than half of the mediations, more than half, what comes out of it is a request for a new evaluation most of the time. And you don't have to go to mediation to do that. You can, yeah, thank you, Carrie. There are other ways to do that. So, and I would just end with a couple of things on the back to keep in mind. The apology, very, very last sheet that I had, thinking about broken trust and how you move ahead with people. And I said this to David the other day, what happened to Child Find? We are getting more and more disputes and requests for dispute resolution around, they won't look at my child. They won't identify my child. So, and typically if they go to mediation, they agree to conduct an evaluation, and many times a child is found to be entitled. So, and I just don't know what's happening there. We talked about striking the balance with the AEAs and the LEAs in dispute. And the other one is, in your position, the balance between compliance and maintaining relationships, not just with families, but with educators you're supporting as well. And those are just things I'm thinking about and talking about, and hope that we can have more discussion about that and around that. That's all I have.
Deb, thank you. Do we have any final questions or comments for Deb before we let her go? What a great presentation. What great information.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
If it helps people too, going to mediation, the ones I've been to have involved attorneys, 2 attorneys, 1 on either side. They've been day-long affairs. And it's not just the day of mediation. There are days ahead of time prepping for it. When you have an attorney involved, the attorney for the parent requests every document that has to do with their child. And I can tell you we've produced over 1,000 different documents in the cases I've been involved with. And so then the attorneys on either side have to go through those and review those, and and so everything that you have about that child is looked at, and they look at it with a fine-tooth comb. And so I will tell you that no IEP stands up to scrutiny when it's scrutinized that way. There are going to be things that are found. A lot of it, some of it's just going to be, it's trivial. It doesn't make a substantive difference. But there are some things that can be found, like the cut and paste IEP goals, those kinds of things. So anyway, there is a lot of time involved in getting ready for mediation, going to mediation, and then doing the things that you agree to in a mediation. And when the parent attorney is involved, and it was nice to see it doesn't always happen, but in the cases I've been involved with, attorney fees, reimbursement of parent attorney fees are sought. And that's at least a $10,000 gamble, because that's what it costs to do all that work by a parent attorney. And that those costs are paid for by the AA and the school district both. And then if Comp Ed is sought, then there's the time spent, you know, for Comp Ed as well. So, you know, it's costly in many ways, not just finance and resource, but it's an emotional cost as well.
Emotional. Very emotional for it's emotional for everybody. And the part about apology, if I even go back to Julie's comment about admitting wrong, I've been talking to the parent advocates that work with families about, you know, apologies to educators for what's happened are also in line and also appropriate. So work with families to find ways so we can start having a relationship again. Because things went wrong doesn't mean education did everything wrong. And if we have if we're reciprocally apologizing, I think it can go a long way too. But that's just work in progress there.
Okay. Deb, thank you so much for today. I appreciate it. This was fantastic. I've been getting messages from different ways from different people saying applause. It's been great having you on. Maybe we can turn to you again next year and hear how things have changed over the past 12 months.
Yeah, maybe there'll be just amazingly good changes.
You'll say, I'm out of work. I'm not doing mediations anymore. Let's hope for that.
Thank you. Now, do I still have this afternoon? Do you still have?
Yes. Yep. We'll see you this afternoon. You betcha.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Bye-bye.
So we're going to break now for about 10 minutes. So look at your clock. 10 minutes from now, we will start up again. Hey, Pat, I am going to pause the video if I can. Can I do that? Yes, I can. So I will pause. And here we go. And we are recording. Thank you, Carissa, Pat, and Carrie for the reminders. All I had to do was look at you guys. All right. So now we have a DE update from Amy Alfrey. Amy, I got to see if you're on here. There you are. I got to make sure I get you in the right spot. Amy will be a panelist just a minute. And just so everybody knows, we are using a Zoom webinar this morning. And the reason for that is we can accommodate more people with a Zoom webinar. So we're giving it a try here and seeing how it goes. And it lends to a little bit of frustration because those who aren't panelists are called attendees. And so the only way you can communicate with us is through the chat window. So it's hugely important to use that chat window with questions or comments. But now we turn to Amy Alfrey from the Department of Ed for a DE update. Hi, Amy. How are you?
Hi, David. Good. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I tell you what, I will share my screen and bring up your information. How's that?
That'd be perfect.
And I think we're a go, Amy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to share a couple quick updates from the Department of Education. And then certainly take back anything else that anybody wants some more information on. Open to any requests or suggestions as well. So a couple things real quick. The IEP, IFSP system, the RFP is in process. And so I think the last time I visited with you guys, we were still just finishing up sort of our request for information process, and we had heard from selected vendors about kind of some of the things available out in the marketplace. And then we had a stakeholder group review that information. And then we've proceeded now into a more formal request for proposal process. And we've actually been through the first two channels at the Department of Education of getting the approval from our Chief Information Office and our Department of Management. So we've taken those first steps, and now we're actually drafting the RFP that will be posted really within just a few short weeks, hopefully. For sure, I would say by the end of March, we should be able to have an RFP, a request for proposal, that'll be posted. Now, it's important to understand that at the same time that we're working on this request for proposal for our special education system, the IEP and IFSP, that the department is also working on the request for information for a new data management system. And that the goal is still to have a unified system. The reason that we aren't waiting and doing one RFP altogether is that really we have a bigger sense of urgency around the IEP system. and we've got to move forward with because we're concerned about the length of time we have with our current system. Before we would have a crash or a concern with the data that's in there, and we know that we have the field really giving us a lot of challenges right now with the current system, and we know that we need to improve it. So we're moving ahead. However, the common group of stakeholders that you see there on that last bullet of the first section, that there's a common group that's been nominated by the AEA chiefs that are providing feedback and input into both the RFI for the overall statewide system and the RFP for the special education system. So we're making sure that we can continue to have those unified. And we would not select a vendor for the special ed system that is not able to link to and align with a bigger data management system, because that is still our end all goal. So the great news is that we are moving forward. We were, sort of in pause for a little while things kind of got settled out with Iowa Tier. But now we are back driving the car, and we are moving forward with the development of a new system. I can't give you an end-all timeline. I know that's a common question from folks, is when will we see the new system? When will we begin training on the new system? And that's really depends on what kind of a vendor we end up with. If we have a vendor who, has a system that another statewide system that they've already provided, but we just need to do some customization for Iowa, then that certainly is going to take less time than if we are in brand new development with a vendor. So we can't really respond to that, give a timeline until we have more information about the vendor we'll be working on.
Amy, I just want to say, hoorah! It is a wonderful thing. It is wonderful that things are moving forward with RFP for the IEP-IFSP system. I think the year that I've been told a couple of times now is that 2020 is the dead end by which time we need to have something up and running, because the current system should be good until then. Right.
Yep. And that's pretty much, that's what we're hoping, right? And we know that we're monitoring that carefully as well, and we are continuing to make any adjustments or supports to the current system so that I don't want to have fear that we're going to have this big crash. We don't intend for that to happen, but we are trying to be really proactive in getting getting a vendor selected, and really jumping back into development of a new and improved and much more user-friendly and interactive system. So yeah, you're right. Hoorah is right, because it was a big pause for a while. We're excited. The second item is the graduation memo, and I know that you've probably received information about this, but I just wanted to reiterate that Chapter 41 addresses the language around a diploma, and that we would not have an alternate diploma for students on IEPs. And there's links there in that you can read the exact language that is being proposed. And so as you look through that document, you can see places where it's underlined or struck through to show you what the changes are to the language that they are actually considering, the State Board of Education. And those are to be in line with ESSA and really our federal requirements. And so the bottom line for everyone is to know is that now that is up. There's not been a decision. It's not been approved to amend that yet, but that is the recommendation. And on March 27th, it was originally scheduled for January 8th, but now scheduled for March 27th, is the period of time from now till then that public comment is accepted. And you can just email public comment to Thomas if you have any concerns or suggestions around that. And then at that time, on March 27th, it is scheduled to be approved or not. It will be voted on by the school board, the Board of Education. So we will, and we are anticipating that that's going to be approved. Now there are a couple different links there. That there was an original memo released by the department on December 19th, and then a revised memo because of that change in the date on December 22nd that kind of describes that a little bit more. And then the other thing I really want everyone to understand is that we understand that this is going to impact districts a little bit as far as if you have students in your districts who have been graduating per IEP instead of, with a diploma. And so we have a stakeholder group that is working on supports and guidance for IEP teams and for districts and for AEAs around like the implications of what this might mean and those supports for having those conversations with IEP teams and what it looks like so that our intent is not to have a lot of students not be able to graduate. We absolutely want students to graduate. We absolutely want students to earn diplomas. We're going to give some guidance and supports to districts and AEAs on how to do that. So that group is working, and those supports will be coming yet this spring and into the summer. Okay, so but that hasn't officially been adopted yet. That language, that's likely to happen at the end of March. Okay. And any questions on that before I jump to the next?
Remember, throw your questions or comments in the chat window, and we'll see that Amy gets those.
Okay, sure. Then the next thing is I wanted to introduce you to a tool. And right now, the title of it is the Iowa Special Education Reference. Some folks are referring it to as ISER. But we're actually hoping to have a name change on that soon. And really, we're putting it out there for you to try it out a little bit. It takes a minute to load, so don't be worried, David. That's one thing we're working.
Be patient, David. Okay, there we go.
We're working with the vendor to on the speed, because it once you're in it, it goes pretty quickly, but it loads a little slow. So what this is a web-based application that helps special ed directors or local administrators access laws and regulations, Iowa code, guidance from the Department of Education, all of those kinds of things. And so it's searchable. Over on the left-hand side there, you can see that there's a search bar, and it's similar. It would be similar to at the top there. Not even there. Like if you wanted to type in quotes or something like specialized transportation, and you don't have to do it now if you don't want to, David, but you can search any topic, and then it would bring up for you a list, and it will tell you where that is addressed in Iowa code and federal code. And you and if you go to hit list for a second, David, since you're in there, sometimes that's a nicer way. It'll give you a little bit of more of a, now this one didn't give us as many as I thought it would, but sometimes that gives you a list and shows you more in context where you're finding it. But let's say you are looking specifically for Iowa code or a memo on guidance on that or something, then that would show up in this list. And so what we want people to do is, I know that different people have different resources you're using. Some of us still the Orange Bible, the little paper version of the regulations. But I want you to try this site out and give us some feedback about how it works for searching the kinds of topics that you're looking for. The nice thing at using this kind of a site versus just Googling something is that this really is grounded in Iowa law and state and federal laws, and it already filters those results for you, so you don't have to kind of wonder if it's a reliable source. Everything on here has been vetted and is approved and as guidance. And so we will be posting all guidance from the department that comes out. We will be posting that on this website. So if you're looking for a letter or guidance that came out from the DE, that will also be housed on this site as we move forward. So try it out. The other link in the document that I sent you in the DE update is a user guide for this. It has just some SER quick tips. And so that's just a little guide with some screenshots that kind of helps you think about how to navigate the site and what kinds of things it can do. And so as you're looking at that, and that is actually a guide that's used for all special education reference sites across states. They are currently developing a custom one for Iowa. And so we'll be getting that out to you as soon as we have it. The vendor has not completed that yet, but this is a general one for the special education reference website. So try it out. take a look. Let us know what's convenient or what's clunky and what could be improved, because we're continuing to work with Microscribe, the vendor, to make that something that can be really user-friendly for our administrators and leaders in special education for Iowa.
Amy, I got to tell you, I just came to the realization at the last directors meeting that was out there, and I think a number of us at the table had that same realization, and I think this is phenomenal.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Yep. And feedback welcome, because our vendor is really, they're really flexible and they're really open to feedback and wanting to make Iowa's version of it as user-friendly for us and meet our needs as best they can. So please, as you're using it, you can email me directly with any feedback, because I'm working directly with that vendor as well. Okay. All right, 2 more things, and these are like opportunities for learning. The Council for Administrators for Special Education, CASE, is hosting a conference in Florida for those of you lucky enough to be able to travel.
Let's go. Yeah.
But since, actually, I'm sorry. It looks like when you just opened that, it's like Hilton Head, South Carolina. I know it's somewhere warm. Anyway, but since a lot of us aren't afforded that opportunity to go, what Iowa CASE is doing, the Iowa branch of the Council for Administrators of Special Education, we are providing 5 sites to attend this conference virtually. And so you can see them listed there: Cedar Rapids, Council Bluffs, Des Moines, Sioux City, and Waterloo. All are sites that will be live streaming the conference. And if you are an iCase member, then you can attend for free. If you are a non-member, you can do $30 for one day or $50 for both days, which is pretty inexpensive as well. And if by chance you are interested in becoming an iCase member, and you want, there's some information on that link that you're on about how to do that by joining CEC and then registering for iCase as the division, and then you would be able to do that for free. I think it's on there, and if not, it's on the other link that's available. So I just wanted to put that out there as something, if any of those locations would work. And the 2 different speakers are Julie Weatherly, who's going to speak on March 8th about legal issues, and then Dr. Randy Sprick, who's going to talk about MTSS for behavior. And then if you go back to that DE document that I've shared, the other thing there, it says agenda underneath, gives a more detailed description for each of the 2 days of like what Julie Weatherly is going to be speaking about and what Dr. Sprick is going to be talking about. So if you want to take a look at that to see if that's something that sounds interesting to you and you're able to attend any of those locations, the registration link is there. Registration is due by February 28th. Again, the dates for this are March 8th and March 9th. So if that's something of interest, there's other information on that flyer. And there's an email address for Janet Romiller, who is kind of our lead on Iowa CASE for supporting this conference. So if you have other questions, you can contact her.
Is it true that DE will be providing donuts at their site?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
We'd be happy to. Come on over to Des Moines.
All right.
So that's an opportunity. And then the other opportunity that you should have all hopefully received a link for is our Special Education Summer Symposium, June 11th and 12th here in Des Moines at the Iowa Event Center. It's free and registration is open right now. As you register right now, you're just registering to attend the conference. Later, there will be a lot more information about the small group, opportunities, the different sessions that you can select. So a couple of the featured speakers, like some of the keynotes for the days, are Rosemary Allen, and her roots are in early childhood, but she's really talking about topics that span from pre-K to post-secondary, which is just disproportionality, equity, and access. And then Dan Rockwell, you might know him as the leadership freak. He's going to really be speaking with us about special education leadership and really talking about leadership at multiple levels, not just from administration lens. And then Chris Ulmer, who is a former teacher and now an advocate and a motivational speaker. You might know him if you've seen things by special books by special kids. He and his wife are going across the country and really meeting families of students with disabilities and writing their story through books. And while they're in Iowa speaking at our conference, they're also interviewing families and students and going to be showcasing some of our Iowa students in their books. So they'll be at the conference as well. So those are some of the keynote speakers. And then of interest, I thought maybe, especially for special education administrators, similar to what Deb was doing today, Thomas and Miriam Van Hukelum will be covering hot legal topics and talking about some of the current cases and decisions and some of the mediations or due process situations that we've had and lessons learned from those. So that'll be a two-part session, and then there'll be a lot of other small group sessions that you can select from that, and more information will be coming out on that. One thing I want to just put a plug in for around the symposium is, I think maybe we should consider changing the title from Special Education Symposium to just, Education for All, or like just a education symposium, because one of the things we really want to do is invite our general education peers to attend this conference. We more and more we have everyone providing services and supports to students with disabilities, and we just feel like a lot of the topics and a lot of the information that's going to be shared at the symposium spans beyond special education teachers and administrators. So we would welcome and encourage you to invite other folks, perhaps folks that are involved in TLC, because there is such a strong leadership strand involved here too, or general education teachers, school counselors. It's really appropriate for anyone who's serving students. So just consider that it's not really just for special ed people. We wanna get the word out there more to other folks as well. So share that widely. We will not run out of room. We've changed the venue from a couple of years ago when it was a little tight, and we have a lot more space. So spread that widely and register yourselves, because you won't want to miss it. We've got a lot of good stuff that's going to be showcased through the symposium, and a lot of good learning.
And the cost is free. And
it's free. You can't beat that.
All right.
Okay, so those are a couple things. If there's other topics, something that I hope to share with you soon, in fact, we worked on yesterday, but it's not quite ready for unveiling, is David, you're going to get to see it actually at the director's meeting, and then then you could probably share it, or the next time that you guys meet, I can also share more information about IDEA differentiated accountability and how that is shaping up, and what's happening around ESSA and around the healthy indicators and continuous improvement, and really some of the steps that are being taken towards differentiated accountability and that new process that we'll be rolling out slowly, beginning with B13 data this spring. So David, you'll see some of that at the director's meeting. I'm sure you'll decide what to share at that time. If not, for sure, the next time I join you, I will have more information and details around that.
Sounds good. Amy, thank you so much.
You bet.
If people have questions for Amy, please put them in the chat window and we'll get to them just as soon as we can.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Carrie.
You bet. I'm up. And I'll kind of zip through this. I want to make sure that for reference, the SPED coordinator syllabus is listed there. Take my word for it if you want to. But what I'm pulling from that is some information that we said that we would share at these meetings. And today's topic is the Iowa Special Education Eligibility and Evaluation Standards. David, is a plug here. Just remember, if you have not signed up for that and you want to, make sure that you contact your regional administrator and or Michelle Lidgett right away at our agency. So if you could go to the review of eligibility standards, That will take you all to a link. It's a pretty lengthy document, like 70 some pages. So it might be something that you want to download or print off. But David, if you could go to page 8. Well, first of all, let me show, if you stay right there on the table of contents, if you'll go back up to that. Right there. Notice that each standard is listed, and then there are specific questions posted for about each standard. So that will help you as you sift through this document to really help focus these questions help focus the comprehension of it. But today I'm just going to give you a really quick review and a little notation for each standard. So David, if you could go to page 8 and towards the bottom of page 8. There you go. So you'll see that the 10 standards are listed there. Now, before I get started with that, I want to remind you that these standards are based on the assumption that school districts provide MTSS or response to intervention for all students. And what we know is that looks different in every school system, every building, across every district. So when I tell you that it's an assumption, it's always good to have that context for in your mind as you look towards evaluating students that are in your building or in your district. And then to remind you also, sometimes we being agency staff hear that evaluations have to be delayed because the student hasn't had enough weeks of intervention, or they're just starting into the RTI process. I want to be clear that if a parent in particular says, I really want my student evaluated for special education, or, I think there's a need, tell me what to do. Please don't delay that evaluation until the student has the opportunity to walk through what the building or the district offers for MTSS or RTI in any content area. Please consider that as a part of the 60-day timeline. So especially if a parent walks in and says, I need to have my student evaluated. I think this kid needs an IEP. You can imagine how parents are going to request that. They're not always going to say, please do an individual educational evaluation on my student. What they're going to say is, I think my kid needs an IEP, or the doctor says this kid needs an IEP, or do you have some special education for this kiddo? So having said that, go ahead and start the evaluation and include those interventions within that 60-day timeline. All right, so I'd like to draw your attention to the first standard. And it says qualified professionals must be a part of all decisions about a child's special education eligibility. Qualified professionals is really kind of the critical term there. So you've got to have people who are familiar with the student. So always the parent, right? But think also about, you need someone who's good about the general education environment that's offered for this student. You need someone who can look at data, do assessments, things like that. So typically LEA special education staff, AEA special education staff. And so qualified professionals are those who know the special education process, know how to use data to make good decisions about kids. So data, as we mentioned, is pretty critical. So if you look at Standard 2, all special education decisions are based on sound data. Sound is subjective, so think about that as multiple pieces of data responding to the domains that the evaluation asked to be discovered or to be investigated. It could be an academic, behavior, socio-emotional, communication, hearing, visual. There's someone could probably chime in. I think there's 6 or 7. But those, and you can exclude those that you think need to be excluded. But where you select those domains, you really need multiple pieces of really good data. Then if you look at Standard 3, when a public agency suspects that a child might have a disability, that might require special education, the agency seeks parental consent for an initial evaluation. You are a public school. We're a public agency as well, so that refers to us, and we have to get consent for an initial evaluation. That's not really new information, but it is something that we really take and hold dear, because that is a right to parents. And as you saw in Deb's presentation, Deb Thomas's presentation, sometimes decisions are made unilaterally, and we didn't always seek the right to evaluate a student. All right, looking at standard 4, children and parents receive procedural protections whenever special education eligibility is questioned, reviewed, or established. Now that's the standard, all right? That doesn't mean you can't go beyond that and review it at every staffing. Typically buildings or districts kind of set their own protocols for doing that. At a minimum, it has to be reviewed when eligibility is in question, when it's being reviewed, or when it's being established. That's what the standard refers to. You can certainly go beyond that. And when we think about the power of involving parents, that meaningful participation, helping them understand what their rights are, helping them understand the IEP and the EER and everything that's in there, it really provides a more meaningful experience for parents to have, other than here's your summary of rights and here's the big booklet that the summary comes from. I don't think we really minimize it that way, but I think sometimes parents, it's always good to ask, if you haven't been through this for a little while, or if this is a new process to you, would you like to spend a little time on your rights and your protections? I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions. I don't see anything in the chat box, but I will invite you to put your questions there if you have some. All right, so I'm going to move on to standard 6, and that is to be eligible for special education, a child must have, in quotes, a disability. So as you know, in Iowa, we don't typically refer to the student by the label of their disability. We refer to students as eligible individuals. You will sometimes run across parents who say, okay, but my kid has dyslexia, or but my kid has ADHD, and my kid has autism. Please put that somewhere on the IEP. If this is a stronghold for the parent, explain to them, we consider them eligible individuals in Iowa, and there's a place that you can also add that disability. It is very dear to some folks, to some parents, to make sure that disability, noted disability, is not lost in the conversation or in the paperwork. Please don't die on that hill. Make sure that that they understand that we consider them eligible individuals. We don't typically refer to the disability, but please add that. Looking at standard 7, if a child's low performance is due to lack of opportunity to learn or due to cultural or language difference, the child does not have a disability. Okay, so I think that's a really tough one. When you think about students who come into your district who don't have English as their native language, it is difficult to assess, though there are really good procedures if you follow them to the nth degree to help determine whether a student just hasn't had the opportunity to learn or doesn't have the language by which they're being assessed in order to determine a disability. So a low performance, as I said, does not mean that they have a disability. We sometimes get kids who have been homeschooled. We don't really know what they've been exposed to. It's okay to ask. It's absolutely okay to ask, and it can cause a really uncomfortable situation. We just can't make an assumption. We have to address and look at the records that are available for determining what the educational experience has been, including language experience has been for the child up to that point. David, could you scroll down just a little bit more? Thank you. Standard 8, a child's disability must cause a need for special education before the child is eligible for special education. So disability plus need. Sometimes that need, it just absolutely shouts at us like a siren, or it's like in big neon lights. It's very, very obvious, and sometimes it isn't. This is where the individualized part comes into play, and also considering that response to intervention. How does this student respond to the interventions that have been provided so far? There are those of us who think, you know, the kid's responding, great, he doesn't need special education. The kid's responding, great, that's evidence that he needed special, or she needed special education. You really have to look at the student's response and look at how they're progressing with those interventions, and consider that as their special need. Now, remember, I'm hearkening back to Deb Thomas's presentation and how the parents often found the need and defined the need differently than what the school or the AEA might define it as. And considering that students can be twice exceptional, so they might be exceptionally bright, or in the case you mentioned, exceptionally gifted in music, but they might have some social skills concerns or communication concerns, or they might have math concerns. So it really is important to drill down and kind of look at what the need is. Hard to nail down sometimes. Sometimes, like I said, it just bounces right out. It just, oh my gosh, yeah, this kid needs it. Other times it really is important to look at the student as an individual. Okay, standard 9. A child's evaluation determines and describes, sorry, my phone's ringing, the eligible individual's special education needs. That's the power of that evaluation, all right? That, if you look at that document as an entire synthesis of the student's strengths and challenges and what really should work for the student moving forward to help them close their gaps, it's a beautiful picture of, and gives a good direction of where people get started in helping kids be more successful. It isn't a unilateral decision that says this kid needs this program, or it isn't a doctor's prescription that says this kid needs this program and this accommodation or this evaluation or this whatever, this service. It's the evaluation and the team that makes those decisions around that evaluation that helps set the pace and the path for that student. And then standard 10, if a child is eligible for special education services, the child's IEP team uses evaluation data to draft, all right? So highlight that in your document to draft an IEP that addresses the needs identified in the evaluation. We have that permission to do an eligibility meeting and come into that meeting with a draft, big, bold draft stamp, however you want to do it. Potential IEP. Parents have the right prior to looking at that draft IEP to say, no, we don't want special education services, or I agree that my child's eligible and I do want to proceed, or I do agree my child's eligible but I don't want to proceed, or I need time to think about it. So please give yourselves permission to go ahead and draft that. It's not considered necessarily predetermination, though I can see what it could look like. The thing that protects you there is to make sure you have draft on it. So if there are some questions, I'll take those now. Please put them in the chat box. And David, could you, so what I want to tell you about that in connection, if you're taking this course or for credit, if you're attending this and getting credit for it, use that synthesis as you look through your your list of kids who are currently eligible and kids that you think are in the process or things that are going on. It really is comfortable. It puts you in a much more comfortable position if you can speak with some authority and confidence about what those standards look like, and share that with your parents and your staff. All righty. I think if there aren't any questions, I'm done. And I went a couple minutes over. Sorry about that.
Carrie, I'm going to ask people if they have questions, if they can maybe just fire you an email.
Absolutely.
That would be great. All right, Carrie, thank you so much. Ron, Ron, you are up. Do you want me to continue sharing my screen, Ron? Just work from it that way?
If you could unshare, it'd probably be easier if I kind of navigate to.
Well, I'm not sure what it's going to let you do or not do, Ron. So we can try real quick here. There, give it a try and see if it will allow you. There we go.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I just wanted to take a little bit of time. On your agenda, there is a link that says handout for presentation and discussion. I'm going to bring that up on our screen. And of course, you can take a look at that. We just wanted to do an update on a couple of items, and these are just general items in the area of kind of special education procedures. They're not necessarily new things. It's more along the lines of interpretation of a few items, and these are topics that have come up across the state during the last few months, and that have been discussed by the State Procedures Council. So I'm just going to walk you through these several items, and the first one is in regards to maintenance of records, but specifically for when we're dealing with reports from outside evaluators or providers. So what we're talking about are these times where a district and or the AEA is provided with an outside evaluation, often by a parent. A parent may bring that to you or release that record to you. These could be mental health types of reports, medical reports, psychoeducational evaluations, private evaluations, sometimes getting into specific diagnoses that we have to kind of work through in the school realm, such as dyslexia. And so the topic here is, how do we maintain those records? And I guess one thing I want to mention is it's very appropriate and really needed that the IEP teams do consider those kinds of reports that may come from a parent. And in fact, even in the AW case that we have talked about that occurred in Iowa, amongst the other issues that were there, one was this issue that, or question, did the school or AA consider these outside evaluations when they were talking about eligibility? That said, that doesn't mean that an IEP team is mandated to follow the contents of these outside reports. They use that information, and the IEP team makes a determination of based on the body of data of what that student's plan should look like. So all that said, we then have this report. Where do we file it? What do we do with it? One topic that came up was Web IEP. We know that we have this place to store additional information. We can upload associated files to Web IEP, and I think across the state, in some places, I think including occasionally within our AA, people have been sometimes uploading electronic copies of those reports, and there was a discussion about whether that should be. So really what we're looking at, a policy or a consistent approach that we hope will happen across the state, is that we would not upload these kinds of reports to the Web IEP application. Couple reasons for that. One is that if they're attached directly to the IEP, they could be considered as part of the IEP, and therefore there could be a family that might say, that you have to do what that report says. So the recommendation is, yes, we would keep that as part of the student's educational record, but we wouldn't attach it to the Web IEP itself. So in Green Hills AA, and this I think will be mainly consistent across the state, what our plan is that we would maintain those kinds of reports in our quote paper student files. We know that those files over the recent years have gotten increasingly thinner because so much of our documentation is maintained electronically, but the recommendation is that we keep these outside reports separately. Another topic that was talked about is that sometimes those reports may include sensitive information about families, in addition to information that's pertinent to the student planning. And the thought was that the preference would be that that would not be living right there as, quote, part of the IEP, but maintained in a separate location. Last topic regarding that. What do you put in the IEP about that? There's a couple bullet points here that are suggestions, recommendations. If you receive such a report, let's say you receive a report regarding my student has dyslexia from a parent. The team would consider that information, and they may use that in their planning for the IEP. But there are places in the IEP where you could document that that was received or considered. We know on page A, there's a little section, other information. That's sometimes a place where people will indicate a doctor's diagnosis or a report or something like that. That could be a place where there could be a reference to outside input. Also remember that in the prior written notice, one of the questions is asking the IEP team, can you describe other options the school considered? There could be a reference to such a report in the prior written notice. And that could even be a report that has a recommendation that the IEP team would not follow. I mean, there may be reports that are suggesting things that are not research based. We have things out there like vision therapy recommendations and those kinds of things. But there could be an indication in the prior written notice saying that this report was shared by the parent. The information was considered, but it could also say that that plan was rejected. So there's a place in the prior written notice where that could be indicated as well. Okay, so that's just that little tidbit about kind of really ultimately about where to locate those kinds of reports, what to do with them. And also a reminder that the recommended practices that we make sure that we do adequately consider those kinds of pieces, which did come up in the AW case, but also be cautious about attaching them as part of the IEP. All right, the next item I have on here says reminders on programming changes this year for the FBA and BIP applications. I'm going to open a link there to show you. I think my main message from this is that this guidance document that I have on the screen right now exists, and it can be something that can be provided to teachers. We provided it to our AA staff on how to use the FBA and BIP with the changes that happened this year. So that's the main message. There's a handout on this because there were some changes this year that did cause some confusion. In brief, what happened was that in the past web IEP programming, the FBA and the BIP lived kind of separately. We did an IEP, we may have written, let's say, a BIP and implemented that IEP and it's archived. But the BIP lived out there separately, and that was intentional in the beginning because the idea was that this may be more of a living, breathing document that might be changed more frequently. But the problem that happened is that people were making changes to the BIP outside of the IEP process, and they were essentially overwriting the old information, and so history was lost because people were essentially typing over old plans, and we didn't retain the history of plans that were written. So in the new process, an FBA or a BIP is always done as part of an IEP process, either a review IEP or an amendment. So we know that was a procedural change. But then this handout also goes on to addressing something that's been a little bit confusing. What happens now is if there was a FBA or a BIP in the previous IEP, when teachers open up a new plan, these existing plans are pulled over. So you can see on the screen right now in this little mock-up some of these previous plans that were living and kind of floating out there in the system are pulled forward. And this gives people an opportunity to update a plan and make it work for the new plan. or it gives an opportunity to delete old plans that are no longer needed. But from here on out, teachers will have an opportunity to delete old plans, and this handout says it, but just wanted to make it clear, when teachers or AA staff might be deleting them, these are copies. So it's bringing forward copies of the old data that was in the system, allowing them to edit it or allowing them to scrap it and start a new one. When this handout is talking about deleting these, the old copies are retained, and these can be removed. So I guess the big message is if there are remaining confusions out there about how this is working, this is a pretty good handout that just kind of walks through what happens and how teachers can now implement the BIP process. Okay, so that was just a kind of information sharing in that area. And then the last item that I wanted to touch on was just a discussion on exit codes. These are the codes that when a student is going off of an IEP, we know in our system we have to code the reason for that. What you see on the screen right now is showing you the various final exit codes that are out there. Across the state, a few of these were being talked about, and we did a little bit of a internal study at each AA and kind of compared notes on it. The question was, are we using these codes consistently and appropriately? And just a couple of things I wanted to mention or reinforce on several of these codes. First of all, the DRO code is dropout for a student who's dropped out. Seems like it should go without saying, but there had been different applications across the state of this. This is the code that we use if a student has dropped out. So if the district has determined that the student has dropped out, that is when we use this code. So this is not an IEP team decision. It's if the district identifies Jane Doe has dropped out of school, then we would use the DRO code to exit them from their IEP. A reminder, when we do that, students do retain their eligibility. So if Jane Doe drops out of school, we exit Jane Doe with the DRO code, and she comes back to school 1 month later, we can pull that student right back into an IEP and continue on. They did not lose their eligibility. They're exited because they're no longer attending school. If a student would return a long period of time later, an IEP team might want to do a reevaluation to look at that issue, but I guess the big message is they do retain their eligibility. Okay, the CPM code, just a reminder that that is a code that we use if students exit their IEP because of a homeschooling situation. Now we know that there's several different paths for homeschooling, competent private instruction, or IPI, but we would exit a student if they were no longer going to have IEP services. A reminder is that there still is an option for students to be dually enrolled. You know, we know when students do homeschooling, if they do CPN, they can be dually enrolled for various subject areas. That can also include special education. So for families that make that choice, we wouldn't exit them. They would be coded by the district as being dually enrolled, and we might have, we may continue with an IEP that could still be a weighted IEP for if a student was coming into school to receive special education services. For example, if they were coming in for reading SDI, but maybe doing other educational things through a homeschool program. Also for CPN, students retain their eligibility. So, and that worries people because, I mean, we do have some cases if a family might be upset, they may pull that student, start homeschooling, and the district may anticipate or wonder, will that student be back in a month or two? That does sometimes happen. If they're exited with the CPN code, they retain their eligibility. We can pull them back on an IEP if they return to school. And two other codes here that I will say do cause confusion, and along with a number of other things in special education, there is definitely some gray territory here, but wanted to talk about them, and there are a few appropriate, non-appropriate uses I can share with you. Let's start at the bottom here. The first one, RRG, that is a code that refers to when students are returned to Iowa General Education, within or outside the AA, and the team has decided that they're no longer eligible. So the RRG, these are students that we celebrate. They've had IEP services. They no longer need special education. The IEP determines that they're no longer eligible. They've met their goals, and we think they're ready to go back into general education. We exit them with an RRG code. But that the caution or the reminder there is that means that they are considered no longer eligible. So if in 6 months, a year, 2 years, the team is concerned, or they may that there may still be disability issues that would require special education, they would start from scratch. They would have to suspect a disability and go through the full child find process. Now, the other kind of parallel code here is RRT. That's returning to Iowa General Education, inactivating the IEP, but the student remains eligible. So then you might be thinking, what does that mean? Well, it can be gray, but that can be used in cases where if we know that the student still has a demonstrated need for special education, and we know that they still need SDI and supports, but for some unusual reason they're not receiving services, we could use that RRT code. One example I could say is occasionally, and this is addressed in procedures as well, we may have a high school student who may have recommended special education services, but they refuse to attend. So it may not be a situation where the parent is revoking services. It may just be that they refuse to go to that special education teacher for help, and they're not attending. So but the IEP team may still believe that they need that, but for some reason they're not attending. That RRT code could be used, and the students would retain their eligibility if the situation changed. My second bullet there, though, is, I can say this is not supposed to be a code that is used for a just-in-case situation. So if we have a student, if they're doing well, if we don't believe that the data shows that they need special education anymore, we should use the RRG. We should return them fully to general education, and not just do a just in case, let's maintain their eligibility. It's not intended to be used in that way. All right, so I will, those three topics are what I wanted to share. I can stop if I'm not sure if there's any chats or questions that we can address at this point.
Yeah, given our time, we have about 7 minutes left. I want to make sure that we're able to cover another item or two. So I wonder if people could just drop into the chat window there any questions they might have for you.
You bet, that would be great.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. So I'm going to grab screen sharing from Ron here, and I'm going to look at our agenda. And I want to jump down to the last. I want to highlight that practice issue, because that was brought out by one of our special ed coordinators, and looking specifically at programming / materials for high school students with a low reading level. And what I would like to do would be, what I'd like to do would be to ask people to jot in the box where my cursor is right now. If you could jot down any of your thinking on programming / materials for high school students with a low reading level, what are things that you have found to be helpful out there? And I ask this of LEA and AEA folks alike. What are the things out there that might be helpful? Who are the contacts they might reach out to? And so I'm going to ask you just to take a minute, jot down some ideas in that box, And I have opened up editing to everybody, so if we could just take a minute and start jotting some things down there, that would be great. Don't be shy. If it's saying view only, you might want to reload. You know, one of the resources out there is we have our literacy team. They'd be great to reach out to as well. Somebody put in the chat box, unique learning, excellent resource for secondary students. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and proceed on and just say that we have just a few more minutes left, and I would ask that if you have feedback to give us today, and I would hopefully everybody will, there is a survey link there at the very end. I hope that you will take a minute or two, and it'll just take a minute. They're very brief, very similar to what we've done in the past, just updated for today's meeting. And if you would put in there your thoughts about today's meeting and what can we do to continue to make this better. We want this to work for you. We know you're busy, and the fact that you take this amount of time out of your day to be with us is outstanding, and we want to make sure your time is well spent. So whatever we can do to ensure that, I want to do it. And then one final thought before we sign off, and that is that you may have heard that we're putting together a special education advisory committee. And the reason for that is that we have systemic issues that we know we need to address. And we've had conversations about them inside the AEA. I've probably talked to some of you individually. But to really solve systemic issues, we need to talk to the people in the field, and that's you. And so we're pulling together a group of administrators, teachers. We're bringing in some AEA folks. And we're going to have conversations around different topics, some of which you heard during Deb Thomas's presentation earlier today, because some of those issues really do apply to us, and they're happening here. So how can we as a system, how can we, all of us, resolve some of the issues that we're seeing in Green Hills AEA? What can the AEA do? What can the schools do? What can we do together to help solve some issues that we know are out there? And so we'll be pulling that together in the very near future. I've actually sent out a doodle to try to find a time that will work. There are some of you who served on a special ed coordinator agenda planning group, and I appreciate those who did that. Not necessarily the same issues. We'll continue to look to that group for input on the agenda. But if anybody from that coordinating group would also have some interest in being a part of the advisory committee and you've not heard from me, shoot me an email and we can have a conversation. You know, a committee of any kind, there's a fine balance, in terms of the number of people, what's manageable in terms of getting work done, having conversations, those kinds of things. We don't want it to get too big, but if you have an interest, shoot me an email and let's have a conversation. So again, I'm going to wrap up. It's 11:30. Carrie, I'm sorry, we'll have to come back to your issue at the next meeting. Our next meeting is April 18th. And don't forget, fill out the survey, and I will be posting a recording of today's meeting on YouTube and making that available to anybody who wants it. Thank you, and have a great day.